Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Up Late with Ben Northey. I hope I get over my speech impediment by the end of the show tonight. As always, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the home of the MSO, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Well, regular viewers will know that I'm coming to you from Christchurch, New Zealand, where I'm happy to say that on the weekend I had the surreal experience of conducting an actual full-sized orchestra to an actual full concert hall. It really was like being on another planet over here in New Zealand, and it struck me that this is probably one of, or maybe the only place in the world where a concert like that with no limits on player numbers or audience numbers is possible. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I've got a feeling it might be the only place in the world. So I was very emotional, needless to say, when I walked out on stage, as I hadn't conducted a concert to a live audience since the last time I was here in March, just before the world got turned on its head. So it was a really special night. You know, we dedicated our performance to all of the musicians around the world who are currently unable to perform. And my heart, of course, immediately turned to the musicians of the MSO who've had such a tough year and been unable to play for so long. And I'm glad to say that we will be returning to some smaller scale online performances later this month before we get back to our larger scale performances in our new season in 2021. And I was also my thoughts were drawn to the musicians of the UK who are entering into another lockdown, and that live musical experience will stop again over there for the foreseeable future. And it's a great reminder of how fortunate we are to be in this part of the world. And while I'm on that, it's been amazing to see those stunning numbers coming out of Victoria, which bodes incredibly well for the future of our own world-renowned orchestra in Melbourne, the MSO. So this chat show is relaxed. It gives us the chance to meet and get to know some of the musicians in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. And you also have the chance during the chat to send in your questions via the chat window on YouTube or Facebook. And we'll get to as many of them as we can later in the show as well. We'll also get the chance to hear a bit of music, specially selected by our guest, to find out why it's so special to them as well. Thank you for your feedback about last week's amazing show and our guest, Eleanor Mancini, who was just incredible. She shared her personal and professional journey with us through her life in music and 4 decades with the MSO. What a fantastic insight into her life's journey it was. She was great. She has such charm and energy and charisma. And tonight we've got an equally compelling guest with his own unique and fascinating tale to share, and another of the orchestra's great personalities and characters, cellist Rohan de Korte. And Rohan is Melbourne born and raised. We'll hear about his musical beginnings, his studies in war-torn Croatia and later in Berlin and Cologne in Germany, and a very interesting sliding doors moment in Berlin, which led him to decide to fully commit to the pursuit of a career as a professional musician. And then his subsequent path to winning a coveted job, which is a whole story in itself. We could do an episode on that, which, it included 26 auditions, which you can imagine is a great test of resilience and character, and one which Rohan passed with flying colours. He's possibly the #1 contributor of humour in rehearsals, now that I think about it. He's so popular in the orchestra that he's the president of the MSO Social Club, and boy, do they know how to have a good time. He knows how to organise a good party. Maybe that's why you're so popular, Rohan. It's very possible, actually. At over 200 centimetres tall, you can certainly find him very easily in a room full of people. He stands out in many more ways than that, and I'm delighted to welcome Rohan de Korte tonight as our special guest on Up Late with Ben Northey. Welcome to you, Rohan.
Hi, Ben. How's it going?
I'm so good. All the better for seeing your lovely smiling face. Now, you said that if you were to write a book, it would be called Grow Up, because it was a long journey to the MSO. But I'm imagining we'll get to all of that. But you've had your hands full with growing up of a different kind, I'm imagining, in the lockdown, because you've got quite a big household over there. How many kids have you got?
I've got 3 boys who are 9, 11 and 13.
That's right. And you've got the makings of a family band, haven't you? Because each of them are very musical and sort of overachieving, it seems. Tell us about the instruments that they play and where they're at in their development.
Well, I never played the piano as a child, so I always thought the best thing to do is get them stuck on the piano straight away, because that's sort of a gateway to anything you want to do. And so we put our oldest son on piano. He started in one of those Yamaha classes where they do these look, see, sing, play, and all that kind of thing. So, we're having a great time with that. And then he found a private teacher. And then my second son, when he got to the same age, which was about 5, just as they started school, he played the violin. And I've got him learning with one of my good colleagues from the MSO. So I knew, who to choose and how. And he's doing an amazing job. And then my youngest son, I put him back on the piano because I figured there was enough space between him and the older one that there wouldn't be any competition. But he kept, and the plan there was to put him on something like the clarinet or, something woodwindy.
Yeah.
And but he kept pestering my wife to play the cello. So he plays the cello, and I remember his face the first time he picked up a cello, and he just picked it up, put the bow on the string, first finger in first position, did this amazing vibrato, and thought, that's exactly what I need to do. And I thought, oh God,
he's just seen the old man doing it. So it's interesting because you were telling me he was desperate to play the cello, wasn't he? Like he really wanted it badly.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about his hassling you.
He used to come in and just sort of, always walk past it and say, what's that? What does that do? And, this kind of thing. So he was always just looking at it. And then, he said, oh, I want to play the cello. And I was like, you want to play something different. I thought it'd be, a bit complicated if I played the same thing as he did. And then he would have to sort of, I just thought it'd be better if he played something different, because I feel music doesn't matter what you play. You just have to do the actual music part of it,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I love hearing about the children of musicians. And I mean, you do have some astonishingly talented children, I have to say, having seen their work on Facebook and the posts that you've put up of your kind of family music making, which is both beautifully theatrically designed and also very musically convincing. Was it like that in your house, Rohan? How did it work for you when you were the same age?
Yeah, I have to confess, I grew up with 3 siblings, an older brother, a younger sister, and another younger brother. And we were 4 kids, all within 5 years of each other. So my mum and dad were very busy. And one of the things that mum made us do was it was her big dream to have music lessons as part of our upbringing. So we all learned an instrument, and we all started, as many people did, with Suzuki. And my older brother played the violin. I was convinced, right, I'll play the violin as well, because unluckily for him, I was sort of quite big early on, and I overtook him in the growth. I was taller and bigger and louder. And so I just assumed I would just take his violin off him and just start playing that instead. And my mum actually convinced me, luckily, to play the cello. And I said, no, I'll play, Jeremy's violin. And she said, no, you can play the cello. It's bigger. And the minute she said that, I was sold. So I've played the cello ever since. I've only ever played the cello, apart from a brief stint on the saxophone at high school. But,
and your brother Jeremy's also a musician, isn't he?
Actually, they're all musicians in their own way.
Everyone's a musician.
My younger brother, Gareth, he's the head of music at Melbourne High School, which is no mean feat. And my sister was head of oboe at the Sydney Con.
Amazing.
And she's retraining herself as a high school teacher, wants to teach English now, I think. That's the last I heard.
That's extraordinary to me. Was your dad also musical? Did he have some kind of musical interest that he injected into the family?
Well, Dad's musical taste was Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan and all of the 60s Woodstock crew. So I grew up...
You've got to have balance.
Knowing all of the Bob Dylan songs, and, Jimi Hendrix was an idol for a while, a big picture on my wall. Led Zeppelin and, Queen, I remember the first time I heard Bohemian Rhapsody, was just thinking, that's it, and songs like that. So, I had a well-rounded, love of Michael Jackson as well as, Tchaikovsky.
Did you own the album Thriller? Did you
own
the album?
Of course, it was my first ever album.
Absolutely, right in the zone for Thriller. Everyone owned Thriller, now that I think about it, back in those days. But, this is interesting about, starting the cello. Was it something you loved to work on? Like, did you enjoy the practice? Who were your teachers? Did you have good people to get you started?
Well, I had John Hopkins' daughter, Sarah Hopkins, is my first ever teacher.
Amazing
Suzuki.
person.
She's phenomenal. She was just filling the room with love wherever she went. She's one of those
Talk about a force of nature, honestly.
What a
way to start for you. Yeah. That must have been very inspiring.
And then I went to a guy called Henry Venig, who I think most of Melbourne's cello fraternity went through, either Marion Hunt or Henry Venig, which was, the two choices I remember one had. And Henry was fantastic. He was a sound person. He just loved the sound of the cello. And in lessons, he was always playing along with me. So it was not necessarily he would sit in the corner and tell you how to do something. He would just play along with you, and you'd play along, and you'd have that that was what lessons were like. You just played with each other. And I was with him for a good 10 years. And then I was lucky enough to be introduced to Nelson Cook, who was an absolute giant. He'd gone off from Australia, from Sydney, and he'd become the principal cellist of the London Symphony Orchestra and had concertos and stuff written for him. And then he came back to Australia. And so I had some great teaching.
Only recently passed away, hasn't he, Nelson? Like I said, a few years ago or something?
At the age of 96, yeah.
Not a bad knock, is it?
No, but he was amazing. He was the sort of person who I just looked at and just thought, right, I just want to be like that when I was growing up. A
proper role model. And so when did you really get the bug for music, that it was kind of the thing that you were very interested in dedicating more time to?
When I was in grade 6, there was one of those moments, a man called Brian Finlayson came back from overseas. He was a violinist, and he wanted to bring back his idea of the German school of violin teaching. And he had these wonderful students, and he needed to show them off, I think, in his mind. So he formed this chamber orchestra that performed unconducted, mostly Vivaldi, Corelli, that kind of thing. We learned our Pachelbel canon that way. And he needed 2 cello players, and that was Josephine Vaines and myself. And Josie and I we met basically on that night in someone's backyard garage, basically, for rehearsal, playing Vivaldi. And that was when I was 12. And later on that year, he found a sponsor who was Mercedes-Benz, and they sent us to Japan on a tour, which was
the
phenomenal.
Kind of sponsor you want for your junior strings ensemble. We've managed to get Mercedes on board. We're off to Japan. Hope that's okay with everyone.
And a year later, they went to Europe. So we performed in Cologne, Stuttgart, Germany, where else? Austria. It was like the best thing ever as a 13-year-old, get taken around and shown these places. It was fun. It was amazing.
It's hard not to get hooked on music when you have those early experiences like that, isn't it? Because they're so unique and so intoxicating that you must have just been hungry when you got back for more. Was that the case for you? You just wanted the next thing, where am I going next?
Yeah, but also it's like suddenly, like, I'm always a team sports player. I was never interested in athletics or, doing anything by myself. It was always about being part of a team. Basketball was perfect for me. Not only was I tall enough to make an impact, but, there was the idea that everyone was doing it together. And I loved that feeling. And orchestra was just like that on steroids. It was like everyone having to basically have the same heartbeat and focus and all that energy going in the one spot. And it was hard. It was a real challenge. But for me, it was that kind of moment of, oh my God, imagine if we could actually do this, and so it was just a big thing.
Well, you came back from that tour and promptly joined, I guess it was the next sort of jump up, was the Gimignani Chamber Orchestra, which was run by Marco von Pagge, wasn't it, when you joined? So was that a new ensemble when you joined it? Was that or had that been around for a while?
It had been around for a few years. And I remember actually, that was when the junior strings of Melbourne is 15 string players. And then, Gimignani had 6 cellos, and that was sort of like a chamber orchestra, but bigger. And, first thing we did was a Mendelssohn symphony. And I remember thinking, oh, if that was, Mozart and Vivaldi, Mendelssohn was just like, that was just an extra foot on the accelerator. And, that foot on the accelerator and, that sound. And there were such good players there. I mean, I was lucky when I was, I think, 18, I got to play the Dvorak concerto with them. And in the woodwind section, we had Michael Pisani, David Thomas. There was Elise Millman. We had Anthony Pope on trumpet. Yep. In the violins, there was Zoe Black, Anne Harvey, Lucinda Moon, all these people who are like fantastic names in Australia now.
Well, nearly all of them, a whole bunch of them are in the MSO, aren't they? Anthony Pope in Orchestra Victoria, and they're everywhere. So that's a talented cohort. It must have been sort of uplifting to work with peers who were that good and lifting each other up all the time.
Well, when you join and you're 15, I suppose that's why I was no longer a junior Strings of Melbourne person. I was not very junior, and probably at about 6'3", didn't look very junior. And so, yeah, I mean, it was fabulous because a lot of them were in university, and so trying to keep up with them was an extra struggle as well. So just more fun.
I can imagine. And John Hopkins, as you said, Sarah's dad, he played a role in getting you into the Australian Youth Orchestra as well, which seems like that was another really important step. How did that work?
So that was, I just finished school and did my Australian Youth Orchestra audition. And weirdly enough, there weren't that many Victorians in it. It seemed to be quite dominated by the Sydney and Brisbane groups, and a lot of kids from Perth were in there as well. And I auditioned, I can't remember what caused me to, I think I might have heard them on the radio or something like that. And just hearing them and going, all right, AYO, that sounds good, Australian Youth Orchestra. If that's the best in Australia, then I want to be part of it and try that. And luckily, actually, John was in the audition, and he put me in as the #1 cellist, so principal cello. And so I turned up there on the first day and saw my name on the list and just thought, oh, there we go. That was kind of it. And no one was really allowed to. No one knew who I was, so that was kind of a bit of a bonus that I didn't know any of the other cliques or anything like that.
Yeah, but, that's right.
Yeah, and so I attacked it with the loudest sound I could and hoped that worked.
Well, tell me. It's interesting to me that we've all got our sort of cohort of people around our age that we've sort of gone through the developmental stages with, and we've gone into professional careers and obviously know of each other's work. And it's interesting to me that cello fraternity, around the time that you were, in that age bracket, you started to do competitions and things, didn't you? And there was one cellist who you said was sort of a dominant presence on this competition circuit. Tell me who that was and about that. Well,
it was interesting. I shared this experience with Nick Bochner when we turned up to a competition in Wagga Wagga, which was the Riverina Summer School for Strings National Cello Competition. And there was
I should point out Nick's also in the MSO.
Nick's also in the MSO, yeah.
Yes.
So it was Nick, myself, and Duncan Fickers. Now, Duncan Fickers is also a cellist who was 6'5". And Nick's not short, he's, over 6 feet as well. And so there's the three big, tall boys sitting there trying to outgun each other by playing louder than each other. I think, there was this kind of, we'd all just try and, basically try and dominate the scene. And, we'd never heard of this kid who turned up, who basically came on in a white shirt, a bow tie and shorts. And he was Leeway. And he was about
how old was he at that point?
I think, probably about 12 years old. And, he just played, and he was the last person who played, and we'd all played, was, tried to do our best, basically. But then he just opened up and we were just like, what can you do?
Yeah.
Like, he was flawless. And it was stunning playing. And we were just like, right, new kid's in town, and he's just gone and showed us where the bar's set. So,
and I should point out for people who aren't aware of Leeway, he's gone on to a stunning international career and is a regular guest back in Australia as well. But that must have been quite confronting, I imagine, seeing this young kid come in and sort of take everything to the next level like that. That must have been quite hard to deal with, I imagine.
Well, I think that because he was just so good, we were just like, wow, actually quite impressive.
Yeah.
Who are you and what are you doing here? How come we've never heard of you before? Kind of thing. And, I was kind of, that's the thing I always sort of think is nice about cellists, is they'll actually ask those questions rather than sit there and try and, in a competition sense, get rid of that person, or, it's not that kind of competition. It's like, wow, if someone can really do it, then you go, that's awesome. And he was so flawlessly, like his shifting technique. I wanted to know how he got those notes up high without even looking like he was in the miss. For me, it was always like throw everything at it and hope, Yeah,
it's interesting. Well, he obviously didn't have an impact on you winning the 3MBS Performer of the Year, Young Performer of the Year, I imagine that was. That was a big deal for you, wasn't it? Because did that enable you to kind of get the confidence to go overseas and further your studies?
Well, luckily for me, he'd won it 3 years earlier, so he was ineligible. So,
perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Yeah. And interestingly, like I was so used to never winning a competition, especially, when Leeway's in the same city as you are, you're relegated to not winning ever against him. So it was just keep up as much as you could. And I used to go to his house to actually rehearse with his mum, and he'd be in the next room practicing. And so I was sort of going, yeah, what's he doing? What's he doing? Oh, okay, got it, and trying to learn that way as well, what he was up to. But the 3MBS Performer of the Year was something that I didn't expect to win because, I just wasn't used to that kind of thing. And just had one of those days where I walked out and just got it right. And suddenly I was $3,500 richer. Yep. And so this is my first year at uni, and I'd only done cello to see what it was like. I'd sort of had these other plans. I was going to, I actually didn't know what I was going to do. I half wanted to become an architect and half wanted to become some kind of law person or whatever, or do arts, or just didn't know. And I mean, history was my passion at school. So I remember thinking, right, well, I'll just try this cello thing out for a year. Nelson Cook was still, teaching me. So that was still my primary focus. And then suddenly I had this money and I just went to him and said, right, well, I want to go overseas and find a teacher for afterwards. And he said, well, okay, that's a good idea, because he was always keen for people to go overseas and study. And he said, firstly, you've got to go and play for Walter Deschbay. Now, it was 1992, October, and Walter Deschbay lived in Zagreb. And there was a very ugly civil war going on in ex-Yugoslavia at the time, and lots of horrible things were happening. Refugees were spilling all the way through. For whatever reason, that didn't seem to matter to me at all. I was just going there for a couple of lessons, and I remember getting on a plane in Vienna, and it was that moment I suddenly went, I'd done a little lookup of where Yugoslavia was on the map and read some TV, headlines on SBS late night news or whatever, because that's basically
how bad can it be? How bad can it be?
And my one overarching thought was, there's 1 million people living there. I'll just become one of them. That was basically all I thought of.
Great strategy. And how did your mum and dad feel about this?
Yeah, let's just say if my kids decided to do something like that, I would be I wouldn't be letting them go at all. Because it was like, mortar shells were landing in Zagreb on a regular basis, and there was reports of people coming in and snipering. And but for me, they were just sort of rumors. Dare I say, I might have had a sort of false news interpretation of all that kind of stuff. But yeah, on the plane, I was the one civilian in my white Dreiserbone, where everyone else was dressed in full, army gear. And they were all soldiers from Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And they're all there with the big UN Pro Forces badge on them. And so they were there to be peacekeepers in Bosnia. And as the plane landed, there was just white Hercules planes lined up on the side of the runway. And it was one of those moments I remember thinking, okay, this is seriously, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah,
it's just
totally.
So not Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne.
And you were planning
Melbourne as you get.
Yeah, you were planning just to get a couple of lessons from Walter Deschbay and then move on, I suppose, to other places. But you stayed there for 2 months. What led you to stay there, and what was he like as a teacher?
Yeah, well, it was only because of him. And so Mira Jakopanec, who actually teaches my son the piano, she had friends in Zagreb, and so I met them to start with. They took me to my first lesson, and I had this lesson. It was one of those moments where he, Walter's a very blunt person, but he's always right. I suppose that's why he can afford to be as blunt as he likes. But he really just took what I'd played for him apart in 2 seconds, and readjusted about 4 angles on my arms and sort of said this and that. And then he said, now try it again. And then he went, and within half an hour, I was playing better than I'd ever played before. And it was one of those moments I just, oh my God, so this is actually how I'm supposed to do it. I was one of these very enthusiastic players who just through sheer willpower and enthusiasm used to produce what I did. But he actually showed me how to do it. And I thought straight away, this is exactly what I need. And suddenly I said, could I have another lesson? And so I stayed there an extra week while I practiced. And then these friends who I'd stayed with, they basically said, we found somewhere else for you to stay so you can practice at the same time because the neighbours are complaining. Right. And so I found this fabulous place to stay with this old gentleman. and he loved the fact that I was there, and was, you know, and I had lessons for 2 months.
Amazing.
And yes, I was just lucky that
and you so you lived there on the smell of an oily rag. You did your 2 months of lessons, came back home, went on an Australian Youth Orchestra tour to Europe, was it, in 1994?
Yep.
And then stayed on. So this must have been a fascinating kind of chapter, because you still haven't, I mean, you're pursuing it, but you haven't really committed to it fully, have you?
Well, at that stage, I was sort of on the AYO tour. We played in the proms, and I just thought, this is great, this is fabulous, and yes, this is exactly how it's supposed to feel, big orchestras and that kind of thing. And then I went back to Zagreb, and I spent another almost a year there. And in doing that, I realized I probably, in a way, got into a bit of strife. You know, I mean, we've just come out of this lockdown, but for me, that period of time was basically like a similar situation. I was in a kind of lockdown where I decided to practice. And after a while, I remember thinking, you know, I just have to push on through this. And about 3 months in, I got quite depressed, and I actually got sick. And then I remember thinking, right, well, I just have to, you know, fight through it and keep going. And I remember thinking, at Christmas time, I flew out to some people I knew in Holland, and then on the flight back in, I remember thinking, I really don't want to be coming back here. And it was just because I was so lonely. I mean, I'm the sort of person who needs other people around them a lot, and you know, hence my big family and all that kind of thing.
And your
alone,
presidentship of the social club as well. Yes.
Yeah, but and there was another problem, is that the place I had to stay was on the side of a mountain, sort of the last house in the village, and it was on the outskirts of town. It was very cheap. They'd been claiming me as a refugee, so they could get extra flour and water and all that stuff from the UN, and sugar and coffee. That was the big thing. I think they wanted more than anything. And I would sit in my room and practice. And if I wasn't practicing, the landlord would always want to chat to me. And his main, and you know, he was suffering a lot with the war that had been going on, and had been going on for a long time by this stage. And it was, you know, causing a lot of people a lot of grief. And, you know, there was a lot of people dying and a lot of refugees. And, you know, I mean, you see the cost of this war in the number of people going through Zagreb on a regular basis on their way to Germany and to try and get some kind of place to live. And, you know, they were all horribly traumatized. And my landlord he had this one conversation topic he always brought everything back to, which was, why isn't Australia involved in helping us all beat these Serbs, kind of thing? And I remember thinking, you know, after having this conversation a couple of times, I had to avoid it at all costs. So I just sat in my room and practiced. And, you know, there's nothing else I really could do. I didn't have any money to go out partying or that kind of thing. Yeah. And by the end of May, I think, that year, I was in probably not a great state psychologically.
Yeah, I think people don't understand that's a common thing too, especially for Australians like us who've sort of had this reasonably happy middle-class upbringing, to suddenly be in a completely different place, let alone a war-torn country that you're describing. But this is a common story. You hear a lot of people who go away for that first, you know, study time, and they do find it incredibly difficult and challenging. And I remember even in Finland, I found it the same for that first year. There's some great questions coming in, Ro. You'll be happy to know, loads of them that we'll get to, and keep sending those in. I'm talking to Rohan de Korte, a cellist from the MSO, who's at a stage of his career where it sounds like you've kind of fallen out of love with the cello a little bit, haven't you? So the next step after Zagreb is going to Germany, and this is really at the low point of your kind of emotional journey in Europe. Tell us about that time, and what took you to Berlin and what happened there.
You know, like you said, I sort of had a kind of Stockholm syndrome relationship with my cello by that stage, and we were keeping each other hostage. And I remember thinking, you know, if I didn't actually see it again, I was, you know, needed a break basically. But on, you know, the way to getting a break, I was kind of thinking, do I go back to Australia and where it's all kind of nice? And somehow I knew I hadn't finished, but I didn't know what I was going to do. In fact, I was sort of thinking, you know, of everything else I could possibly do, maybe travel, maybe do all these other things and work in a bar, whatever. But Walter Deschbach said, go to Germany, have a look at this, von Karajan Academy that they had just set up for the Berlin Philharmonic. And I got in touch with Brett Dean, who's, was amazing at this time because he helped me out. I stayed at his place.
Yeah, he's a violist in the Berlin Philharmonic at that time.
Yeah. And he was one of those people who I kind of latched onto straight away. And he took one look at me. I think, actually, he's admitted to me afterwards that, years afterwards, he said, yeah, you weren't in a really good spot there. And I was kind of like, he said, well, come and hear the orchestra. You've never heard it before. And so I went into this concert, and I remember that day it had been cold, wet, windy, one of those sort of things. Europe wasn't being friendly. Berlin is a huge city that if you love it, you love it. If you have a bad day, it's not going to help you. And so I remember going to this concert just going, yeah, right, I think I'm done with this. And I really was. And I was just kind of thinking, all right, I'll listen to this orchestra and whatever. And it was Mahler 9, Abado conducting. And it was their calling card piece at the time. So they were playing it superbly. I mean, they play superbly anyway. But I remember sitting in the back of the hall, because you get these tickets where you stand at the back until there's a free seat and the usher points you there and says, go and sit at that one. So I was sitting there just waiting for something to happen. The orchestra came on stage and I was like, yeah, ho-hum. And Mahler 9 started. And I remember from the very first moment, it was like someone who I'd always wanted to tell me a story just started talking. And it was, sounds really silly, but it was like someone telling me they love me and it was all right and that everything would be fine. And by the time this last movement came, I was just sitting there in the hall and I suddenly knew what I wanted to do. And I just thought, I don't care. I want to actually be part of this and I want to play that and I want to do that and I want to, and the last movement's a particularly special one. It's Mahler quotes the Beethoven Les Adieux chord from the piano sonata. And if anyone knows the tune from Abide With Me, there's a hymn that also quotes it. But what Mahler does, he turns it inside out and he makes it a minor chord. And I remember just the tears started coming and I was like sitting in this seat, bawling my eyes out, just lapping up every single note.
It doesn't sound silly. It doesn't sound silly at all, Rohan. I mean, it sounds like exactly why people come to concerts. It's exactly the reason. But to have that at that moment for you, when you needed it, for Mahler to show up, for the Berlin Philharmonic to be there for you, that's extraordinary. And I've got an excerpt from Mahler's Ninth Symphony. Why don't we have a listen to that? This is a bit of the finale of Mahler's Ninth Symphony that Rohan's talking about. Let's have a listen. Does it still get you?
Oh, completely.
Every time?
Yeah. Well, that was us playing it. That's the MSO recording.
That's right. That was Sir Andrew Davis conducting in 2018. It would have been.
I have to say, it was that performance was the reason. I just thought that's exactly why I've taken this whole journey to get to that point where I could play it with someone like him. Yeah. And just the way it felt to play it on stage. And the MSO is such a great band. That we all get together and there's a feeling that's on stage with us all, when we do the stuff like that, and everyone is committed completely to just holding that music and cradling it just the way it should be. And
the band knows Mahler so well, don't they? And that late romantic music, particularly, it's one of the great features of the orchestra. So let's move then to the next step, because I want to get to the auditions, because that's a fascinating discussion to have. But after it's all clicked for you. You've made the decision to probably stay in Europe, I'm guessing, and go and study further. And you ended up in Cologne. So how long did you stay in Cologne studying for?
Yeah, well, Ludwig Quandt, the principal cellist of Berlin Philharmonic, said, well, how old are you? And I said, I was 22. And when I played for him and I said, I'm thinking about this at Karajan Academy, he says, no, go and study. He says, it's free in Germany. These amazing schools, you will learn so much. You'll have a great education, and then come back and play for us. And so I went to Cologne, having talked to Walter Deschwey again, who would be a good teacher for me, found a teacher called Klaus Kangieser, who was a particularly knowledgeable and, dare I say it, very German-style teacher. I remember one of the first lessons I had, and I played something for him, and he said, oh, you can tell you come from an English-speaking country. And I said, oh, why? And he said, everything you play is so ambiguous. And I was like, oh, that's a particularly German way of saying that, actually, but because the Germans are never ambiguous about anything. And he was like, but yeah, I mean, it was probably Beethoven I was playing, so he had every right to say, I don't know whether it's fish or meat or red or white wine. He says, I want to know, commit to one or the other. And so there was that, and so I loved the way they taught, or that he taught. And, I learned so much there. And I had, they had like a piano player in the class with you, like in your lessons, playing all the parts along with you. I mean, I couldn't do anything but learn quickly and well. So I was very lucky. I had 5 years there.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a developmental opportunity, but it's also another window for people who aren't musicians into how long it takes to really, I mean, this has been a long period of time now. That was 5 years just in Cologne. And I mean, I suppose you saw yourself staying in Europe at that point in time, and just, I mean, working in one of the many orchestras there. How did it work out to come back to Australia?
Yeah, well, I'd turned into it, by 1998 or 99, I'd turned into a complete European snob. I decided everything there was better. They cared for music in a way that I couldn't remember in Australia and all this. Anyway, and, I mean, as students, we could go to concerts. In the Cologne Philharmonic, they had 400 concerts a year, basically. And students could get $10 tickets. And you just get these tickets and you sit where there were spare seats. And in early 2000, the MSO came through on tour. And of course, a bunch of us students thought, of course, I was going to go and hear them. And then a whole bunch of them said, yeah, I've never heard an orchestra from Australia. Wonder what they play like, And the MSO came on stage and they started with Isle of the Dead by Rachmaninoff, Marcus conducting. But this sound just came out and it was like, wow. It was like MSO playing it. And I remember thinking, hold on, I hadn't heard the MSO for a long time, at least 6 years. And this friend of mine sitting next to me, a really good cellist, just nudged me and just went, what the hell are you still doing here? He said, you could go back home to Australia and play in an orchestra that sounds like that. And I was just like, yeah, actually, what am I doing here still? And I'd done some auditions, already for German orchestras. I'd done an orchestra in Spain and tried in Switzerland. And I remember thinking, yeah, actually, I could be stuck in a city that had a big industrial complex next to it that was sort of in polluted Germany where the sun didn't shine as much as I remember, and there'd be, never a beach holiday. And I went, yeah, I'm going. And so that was the decision. Suddenly the MSO came through and played, and I was like, got to get back home. And amazing. Suddenly I just needed to get back home. And so I finished my degree. So
you came back to Australia in 2000. And then you started working as, I'm presuming, a contractor or a freelance player with different orchestras, but then doing a lot of auditions. And this is what I wanted to get to, because I just think there's an amazing tale to tell that's so instructive for many of the young musicians who are in this situation now, and the kind of brutality of the auditioning process.
I found it particularly brutal.
I mean, I think it's not uncommon. Well, I mean, people would say, wow, 26 auditions to that's just, how do you process that mentally? But also there are loads of people who do that many auditions. That's actually, reasonably common. But you'd had other professional experience. You know, I made a note here that you played in SSO for 3 years, Orchestra Victoria for 5 years. But tell us about winning the job in MSO, because I just think that is really a fascinating story.
Yeah, well, I mean, to explain what happens in an audition, a job gets advertised, you get about 2 months lead time. I mean, usually you know when they're going to be advertised if you know the orchestras or if you know the kind of who's retired, that kind of thing. I'd done a few auditions already, but in MSO, what happens is you get the invitation to audition. It'll usually be based on your CV. Have you played before? Yes. They might put you in the early round where they cull a few people before you get, into the first round. And then you get given a time slot. They give you like an hour time slot. You have to turn up on that time, and you have to, you're not sure when you're going to play in that hour. And there's like all these rooms that have been blacked out. You get let in one at a time, so you don't see who else is there. Then someone comes and knocks at the door and says, right, it's your turn now. I mean, they give you a kind of idea. You'll be on at 9:30 or something like that. And then you get walked to the door. A bell will ring from the inside saying, yes, we're ready for the candidate to come out. You walk out on a carpet so that the panel can't hear the footfalls. There's a massive black screen across the top of the front of the stage. You sit down behind, you're allowed to tune up, but if you make a cough or you make a sound or anything that might give away your presence to anyone you might know on the other side of the screen, you're sent straight back out. So there's pressure already. And then you perform. You've got about 3 minutes. You perform the exposition from a Haydn concerto and some excerpts, and then you walk back out again. And in those 3 minutes, you have to convince all of those people that you are a worthy standard to get into the orchestra and before the next person comes in. So it's designed to be completely fair and designed to be completely impartial. And the MSO does it particularly well, I think, in terms of keeping the anonymity of everybody on the other side of the screen. Yeah. So it's based 100% on how well you can play those 3 minutes. Now, whether that's the best way to choose a musician or not, we can debate about that. But that's the way you have to actually have to get in. That's the way every single person in the MSO won their job.
And it protects the orchestra from any abuse of the process, doesn't it? So any favoritism towards certain candidates, but it is different in Europe, the process for auditioning.
My audition that I did for the Berlin Phil, I walked straight on the stage. The whole orchestra was sitting in the whole hall over different seats,
just looking at you. Yeah,
just looking at me. And I tuned up and I said, "Yeah, right, I'm ready to start." And no one said anything, and I was just sitting there. I looked around at the pianist and said, "Please start," and she said, and then a voice came from somewhere, "Well, start." And it was like, I was great. Okay. I realized it's kind of like a psych out. So I just looked straight at the floor and just did as well as I could and walked off. But it was like, you realize, and people who win that just to look back and go, "Yeah, right, come on, here, straight between the eyeballs." Well,
but which is the more unnatural of those two environments to play? They're both pretty weird, aren't they?
Yeah. Well,
and unsettling.
Yeah. It's not fun. Let's put it that way. But it is something that does resemble a pressure situation on stage. They want to know. I mean, an orchestra wants to know they can trust you when things get hot on stage.
Absolutely.
And they need to know you can hold your nerves. So it is that part of it. I always made the mistake, thinking back in hindsight after the one I actually won, of what I'd done wrong previously. I used to go on stage with this idea, in 3 minutes I have to show everything. And so I would say, and I'd be practicing, my first note had to be 3 oscillations of vibrato that way, and I would make a crescendo with this, and I had this list a mile long of everything I had to complete in order for it to go well, and in a way it was basically walking on with that much baggage. Never worked. And it was only when I'd basically given up the whole idea of getting a job. I was 35, I had 2 kids at home, and I was sitting there going, right, this isn't going to happen. And I was quite happy about that in a way, because I thought it's just like what a sports star has to do, like Dusty Martin. As good as he is, he's going to have to retire at 35 still.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that, Rohan. Never say that again.
But he's going to have to find another career. So I just thought, I'll just be like that. A ballet dancer does the same thing. Most piano players, unfortunately, have to do the same thing as well, because, and so I just thought, that's it. I'm finding a new career. I went into marketing and public relations, and was in a lecture from the marketing professor who got bored with what he was talking about and told us all the story about how he won a Coke contract for his company. And he said he went in, there was 32 other companies, and his company had spent $120,000 just on the pitch for him to go in for a 3-minute interview with the executives from Coke who were going to choose who was going to get this job. And I remember thinking, oh my God, he's talking about an audition. And he talked about how he'd done all the work on how it was going to work. You know, once they won the job, they were going to sell Coke this way. They had the rollout plan. They had everything sorted, and it was all picture perfect. He said he covered every detail. But he said the actual audition, he knew he had to go in there and convince them in 3 minutes to choose him. He said, because every other company did the same thing. Everyone had the bases covered. They had the rollout plan. They had everything. It was pretty much going to be exactly the same from whichever company they went with. But he said, so he went to the audition, or this interview, and he said, all I have to do is sell them myself.
Yeah. You don't have to be something you're not. Yes. You just have to be you.
And weirdly enough, I just went, oh my God, that's what I've been doing wrong all this time. I have to sell what I do well. And I have to sell what I do well. And I just thought, okay, what do I do well? You know, apart from stuff off auditions, it was about, you know, what I did well. I can make a nice, sound on the cello. So my thing was, I reckon I can probably make a nicer sound than most other people. So for me, I just thought from the first moment I walk in there, I'm going to be concentrating on making the most beautiful sound I can possibly imagine. And in that came the most characterful, the best, most beautiful shift and everything, but everything had to be just about the most beautiful sound I could possibly make. Yeah. And like a good boy who can only concentrate on one thing at a time, I stuck to my goal of playing a beautiful sound the whole way through. And, you know, rather than having a baggage full of lists this long that I had to complete. And apparently people on the other, side of the screen said, "Yep, you really nailed it. It was beautiful." And I was
unbelievable. Yes. And isn't that great though? You distilled it down. You distilled it down into one thing, which kind of became a mantra in some way. And it was something that you knew that you did well. And the confidence that comes with that just feeds through every other aspect of your playing. That is a fabulous lesson for people auditioning. There's some questions coming in about auditions, quite a few, which we should get to quickly. So at your 26th attempt, your 4th attempt with the MSO, at the age of 36, you win your first full-time professional job. I mean, that is extraordinary. And so how did the first rehearsal go?
Well, this is
he said knowingly.
I know. Yeah. So I was so happy with myself that I'd won this audition. And I remember thinking, oh, yes, here I am. And in order to, really cement that, because what happens after an audition is the trial process, where basically you have to forget everything you did by winning an audition and beating everyone else. And you have to suddenly become a member of this team. And you have to basically go, I'm the best person to fit into this team. So for the next, 6 months to a year, you have to make sure that you are the missing link for this team and you will fit in perfectly because, whoever you sit next to, you basically have to be playing their cello. You have to be that close and you breathe together and this kind of thing. Anyway, I'd completely, I was so stoked with having, won my audition that, it was Rachmaninoff too, and I think Alexander Lazarev was conducting or something like that. It was one of those moments and, it starts off pianissimo cellos and basses and everything. And I was so keen to show everyone that they'd made the right choice. I was playing this beautiful core pianissimo sound, which penetrated through everyone else's. And I was thinking, yeah, see, this is the sound you paid me for, kind of thing. Conductor stops. He says, no. And he does it again. He's just, and I did it again. I said, yes, here we go. And then, and he says, not soft enough. No, sorry. And I did it again. And I was just like, and anyone who knows MSO rehearsals in particular knows straight away, if conductor has to ask more than once, twice is the absolute limit of the fact of anyone asking for anything before there is either a nuclear style explosion happens or the whole orchestra shuts down basically with something's going wrong and this is not how it works kind of thing. David Berlin turned around very quietly.
The principal cello,
Principal cello, and he said straight away, he says, we're just going to go for a much more of a group sound. Okay, and he turned back and it was silent, quick, and I just went, oh my God, what the hell am I doing? It's like, I love David Berlin. I'll follow him anyway.
But it's that is great leadership.
It's really good, yeah.
He looked after you in that moment. Well, I mean, it's been 10 years for you in the MSO so far. And I know that, you know, how much you love to play in the orchestra, because I can see it in your face. I can see how much you love to play in the orchestra, which is wonderful. And the tours, and I know that you've spoken about your admiration and joy to play with Sir Andrew. Running the social club, I mean, we could just touch on that very briefly because I have to get to questions. We've gone a bit over time. Why do you love running the social club, apart from the parties? What is it about that experience that you are drawn to?
Well, okay, for those who don't know, the social club is this sort of, every player in the orchestra puts in like a tiny amount of money every week, and it basically pays for tea and coffee, pays for, you know, presents for anyone who's had a baby or a wedding or that kind of thing. But the best bit is the retirements and the speeches that happen at the retirements. Because, I mean, once you join the MSO, you don't leave. Basically, that's kind of what happens. Mostly because it's such a good orchestra to play in. No one wants to, you know, you're not really getting anything better by going to a different orchestra.
Yes.
We have great music. We have great colleagues. We have a really nice atmosphere. I love the string sound, especially. It's so homogenous, and everyone's part of the same team. We all understand that. And it's a really beautiful environment. You know, we have our disagreements, whatever, but it's like, generally, it's such a supportive place to work. And we have these great retirement speeches, and I just love the whole getting someone to talk about the career they've had. I mean, you know, Jeff Payne or someone like that retired 2 years ago. And I remember his retirement speeches and finding out these ridiculous facts, you know, things like he used to smoke, you know, back in the day when they had cigarette ashtrays on music stands.
On the stands.
You know, you know, things have changed. But, you know, and he used to have a cigarette and basically inhale the whole lot in one go and blow it out through his trumpet while he was playing. You know, stupid things. I mean, and Jeff Payne could do it, but it's like, you know, and just, you know, remembering that these people, their lives was devoted to this organization that produces sound. And I mean, what I also love about it is this sort of understood reason for why we're here, which is for the audience and for this whole city of Melbourne, so that they can actually listen to this amazing music being played live, as well as we can possibly do it. And we feel a great responsibility, and everyone knows it in the orchestra. And every time we step out on stage, we have that forefront. And I just love the feeling of being able to encapsulate that in someone's retirement speech and say, well, you were part of that, and we really wanted to celebrate you. And I don't know, that makes me feel that's part of it. I don't know.
That's why you love it so much. Well, look, soon I will have to start wrapping up, but there's a few questions that I'll get to. One really interesting one about mental health, which I think be great to get your take on as well. Who's on the other side of the screen when you audition as you slug your wine? I might take that one. Well, normally it's the principal players, aren't they? Isn't it? I mean, principal players from particularly that section that you're going to be joining. But often you'll have all of the principals, won't you, listening to an audition? Is that how it works at MSO?
I think there's a minimum of 13 or 11. It has to be an odd number so you can get these. You need 50% to pass around. You need 2/3 to actually be appointed to a job. And you need to convince everyone there. And it's a lot of the principals with the cellos. It was the whole cello section was there. I think the reason they have a lot more for violin jobs is because a lot of the violins want to be part of the audition process, and woodwind players and that kind of thing. You'll have all of your principals and that kind of thing as well.
How important is mental health these days to musicians, and what new strategies or techniques are being implemented? Have you seen a kind of a development in that area working in the orchestra?
We acknowledge it a lot more than I think it used to be. I mean, performance anxiety is definite, is very real, and everyone, you know, I don't believe anyone who says I never get nervous before a performance, because you know the behaviour says otherwise. Everyone is, and
regardless of how experienced you are, it doesn't matter. Yes, and
it can often be, you know, even the more experienced you are, you know, because things affect you. And I mean, we're performing often 2 programs a week, and so there's a lot of repertoire to learn. We have to be on our toes. Often the stuff we go on stage with, we've played through once or twice only. And it's about trust trusting your colleagues around you and trusting everyone on stage, and also knowing that, you know, that's what we have to do, and we have to be in the room committed, or else it doesn't work. Otherwise, someone lets someone else down. And when someone lets someone else down, usually what happens is they pay the mental price of being, you know, suddenly they're, you know, because you try and be in sort of like a, dare I say it, like a zone. And once the zone is broken and the bubble is sort of not what it should be, that's when people start to get very stressed. And, you know, so we try and manage that, not put massive workloads in when you're going to have Mahler symphonies or something that's really mentally and emotionally taxing. You know, film scores are a bit different because there's a lot of music to play, but somehow the mental state is not the same as
concentrate in a different way.
Concentrate in a different way. I mean, apart from
and what about
more to do?
Yeah, well, sometimes they can be quite draining. But look, many music students won't be able to travel overseas. This is another question that's come in for the foreseeable future. And I mean, you know, a lot of them are struggling, I think, with altered plans, wondering how things are going to work out for them. Have you got any particular advice that you'd like to impart to those people who are, you know, possibly hoping to tell a story like yours one of these days?
Well, one of the things I remember was when I was studying, it was the VCA and it was Melbourne Uni. They were the two music institutions. ANAM hadn't started yet. The AYO was an environment that provided a bit of a hothouse of talent and that kind of thing. But I owned 4 records that had cellists on them when I was 18. I had the Casals, Bach Suites, Jackie Dupre doing Elgar, Rostropovich's Dvorak, and Rostropovich doing his Beethoven sonatas. And, you know, so I didn't know that much of what was going on in the outside world. You know, to be honest, I didn't know how other students played, let alone in other cities, you know, across the world in Europe. And I remember the best thing about being in Cologne was the environment I was in. They had 6 international competition winners who were studying performance cello. There were 44 of us all doing performance cello. Everyone was gunning for it. And I remember the environment where you got to hear everyone play and you got to actually listen to what they sounded like I found it inspiring and intimidating at the same time. And I think one of the things that students these days can actually draw on is the fact that everyone's up on YouTube. And so you get to see how every single person in the world is playing. There's a glut.
That's right. You don't have to go there to hear them.
Yeah. And, you know, ANAM is definitely a top quality institution where you get that kind of talent and that kind of atmosphere of everyone pushing each other, well, or inspiring each other. I shouldn't say pushing each other. But, you know, I think the environments actually do exist now in Australia, like ANAM is particularly one of them. But also, you don't have to learn from musicians. That's another thing that I found. My wife, as you'll see behind me, there's a beautiful screen that has a Christmas sleigh.
I've deliberately been avoiding this question because, you know, obviously there's a story there. What's with the backdrop, Rohan? Is it a Christmas nativity playing out? How's this fitting in? Tell us.
Right. So my wife runs a children's theatre company, and she.
This explains a lot.
This explains a lot. Yeah, with my haunted house. Yes, she helped me a lot with that. But no, so she's an actor and she runs, you know, incursions into schools. And with schools being shut down, she hasn't been able to do her job. And so she's been basically filming shows from home. Well, I've been helping film them, which is another skill I've developed. And, you know, she sits there editing for hours and then basically sells them to schools and libraries and that kind of thing. And the reason I say you don't have to learn from a musician is I will always play anything I do to her first, because she's such a vivid, she has such a vivid imagination and such an honest opinion of what she likes and what she doesn't. And for her, if the music isn't speaking to her, she'll tell me straight away. She says, yeah, I get it, but it doesn't mean anything to me. And so straight away I'll go, right, I'm not communicating it properly. And that is our first job, is to communicate the music and the feeling and what happens more than anything. And so play for an actor. They're really, you know, or anyone who's honest.
That's a wonderful message to finish on. I mean, this has been a great chat, Rohan. Thank you for being so generous with sharing your journey. I think you're very inspiring, and particularly facing that long road. It's a different kind of path for everybody, and it's a great example that some paths take longer than others, but that richness is in the journey as much as it is in the destination. And it's also a great example to young musicians about the audition process and the importance of taking the pressure of the goal off ourselves to concentrate on the things that we can control. So thanks to you, Rohan, for being such a positive and generous member of the MSO. I know you're loved by your colleagues, and not just for organising the parties, although that's clearly part of it, but you are true joy to work with and to speak to. Thank you for being my guest tonight on Up Late with Ben Northey.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. And thanks to you for being with us tonight, for all of your questions. Next week, we're proud to be highlighting the fact that it's NAIDOC Week, a week where we celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Our guest is a great friend of the MSO and somebody who's been a frequent collaborator with the orchestra, the award-winning opera singer and songwriter Jess Hitchcock. And we'll be hearing about Jess's work with the MSO, which includes performances, education projects. She's recorded all of our acknowledgement of countries in multiple Indigenous languages. We'll also find out about her amazing work with other Australian artists, such as the singer Kate Miller-Heidke, who she was at Eurovision with last year. I'm sure there's a story to tell there. She's toured with Paul Kelly, but also, and most importantly, her decade working as a teacher, composer and artist with Australia's only Indigenous opera company, Short Black Opera. So something to look forward to next week as we mark NAIDOC Week. We hope you can join us again. A big thank you to Tarrawarra Estate as usual. I've run out over here. I'll be back soon. I'll get some supplies again. But thanks for your support of the show, Tarrawarra. It's much appreciated, I can tell you, and I'm sure Rohan would agree. Thanks to you all for watching. For those in Melbourne, I've never been prouder of our great city. Keep looking after each other, stay positive, and go well.